I need to record the meeting for our YouTube channel. And so hopefully that's happening now. Uh, yes. So anyway, apologies for repeated technical corrections here. So in 2020, we submitted this report to the European Commission that looked at the tension between technology and democracy. The link that is shown here, you can use to get the report, publicly available. It has aged pretty well, all things considered, but we're working on an update as we speak. Slightly different team, there's some overlap between authors, but the lead author again is myself and a colleague from the EU. And we're hoping to have this done at least to some degree of completion by the end of October. That's, fluid. We initially thought we'd have it done the end of August, but it didn't quite work out that way, as usual. So there's a lot of material in there for background if you're interested. Now, all projects are embedded in one way or another in this global context. Whatever you do, there's some connection. It may not be obvious, but it's always there at the back of my mind. And here are the specific projects that we have in this group. Now, each of those is a grant, a funded project from various different sources. And I'm going to walk you through at least some of them today. I don't know if I'll have time for all of them, but I've prepared a lot of material to explain this to you. Now, three of them are winding down by the end of this year or just after. Actually, no, they're all by the end of this year, and then SOMI for them is going to wind down in April. So, in fact, a lot of them are winding down, but ProDem Info is going to continue. And conceivably, there might be two new projects coming online that I've applied funding for, but we won't know that till April. So now let me walk you through some of the stuff. Jigsaw. By the way, anybody know what Jigsaw is? Ever heard of it? If not, it is part of Google. But it is independent, kind of, not really, it turns out. But it's their technology incubator. It's a think tanky kind of research institute that is part of Google and that they use to develop new ideas, new technologies, with a particular emphasis also on social and behavioral sciences. So let me tell you the main part of our work for Jigsaw, inoculation against misinformation. Now, inoculation, again, is something that is suffusing a lot of projects within TeDCog. Some of you will be doing inoculation projects, maybe. It has two elements. The first one is that you warn people about the threat. In other words, you warn people that they may be exposed to misinformation. The second thing you do is that you refute an anticipated bad argument, misinforming argument or content. And that means, logically, that you have to know ahead of time how people might be misinformed. So you don't have to know exactly what they're going to encounter, but you have to know how they might encounter misleading information. And we've published a large number of papers, pretty large number of papers on this issue. And the bottom line is that after people watch a brief video that explains a misleading talking point, they become better at discerning between high and low quality information. They also become better at discerning misinformation. So I want to walk you through some of these experiments. We've done 5 different experiments in this particular paper where we looked at different misleading techniques. And let me just explain this or show it to you by playing this video, and hopefully the sound will now be with you. And this is something that people get to see, and then we present them with misinformation. And we have a control condition in which they don't see this video, but some other thing about freezer burn or something completely unrelated. So pay attention to this.
You might think about skipping this ad.
You hear it?
Don't. What happens next will make you tear up. Wait, you're still here? I mean, great. Looks like the trick worked. You see, when watching videos or browsing online, you're likely to encounter content that is loaded with emotional language, and with good reason. Playing into emotions, especially negative ones such as fear, anger, or contempt, is a trick to get you to pay attention to something when you otherwise wouldn't. It's likely that is a big part of the reason you're still watching this ad is because you were lured in by our use of emotional language in the very first sentence. Research has shown that expressing emotion is key for the spread of moral and especially political ideas in social networks. So let's say when you're writing a headline and you're trying your hardest to manipulate your readers to click. One thing you can do is pepper your headlines with a bunch of emotionally charged words. Call it a horrific accident instead of a serious one, a disgusting ruling instead of a disagreeable one, or a heartbreaking twist of fate instead of an unfortunate coincidence. That way, you're likely to reach more people and influence their reactions. So let's see how this plays out in real life. Let's take the following headline from the movie Anchorman. No emotional manipulation at play here, just to the point, no nonsense coverage of such an important event in world history. This headline, on the other hand, see what they did there? The writer used an emotionally charged word like revolting to describe a whole group of people. Means people. Oh well, you get the point. They're fear-mongering. So whenever you feel outraged or angry, remember, someone may be pulling your strings. Don't be manipulated. Truth Labs. The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
So we show people the video. We then give them these questions that later on are presented together with a social media post shown here in the top left, which is either highly emotive or isn't. And people's task is to identify whether this post is manipulative, whether it's trustworthy, whether they would share it, and so on. So basically, we're testing people's ability to differentiate between good and bad information. Simply put, I mean, good and bad are nuanced concepts, but there's some things that are very misleading, other things that are not. And can people differentiate between the information, two types of information, better after inoculation than before? And what I'm showing you here is summaries of 5 different experiments dealing with different aspects of manipulation. You just saw the emotion video, but we also have training videos for all these other things, which, by the way, you can download at inoculation.science. It's as simple as that, inoculation.science, our website. You can look at all the videos. And in each of the panels of data here, what you see is the 5 different types of video in 5 rows, 3 different measures, one about manipulativeness, trustworthiness, sharing. Let's focus on the left-hand panel only to simplify it. That's manipulativeness. Are people better after inoculation at identifying manipulative material? And the answer is a very clear yes. Look at the red dots. All of those are to the right of the vertical 0 line. That's the dotted vertical line. Now, what that means is that after inoculation, people identify manipulative information and differentiate it from neutral information better after inoculation than after the control condition. And what you see here basically is the effect size that compares the inoculation to the control condition. And as you can see, in all cases, the red dots are over on the right, significantly so, meaning discernment, differentiation ability has increased. And we show this over and over again. Let me show you one more that we've done on YouTube. So this is one of the good things if you're working with Jigsaw. They're part of Google, so they kind of have access to YouTube. It's not easy even for them, but we managed to do it. They had two teams of lawyers battling it out. We want access. No, you can't have it. Yes, we want it. And it's a weird internal dynamic within Google. But we managed to recruit 1 million people who watched our emotion video, the one you just saw, as an ad. So they were actually not wanting to watch this video. They wanted to watch something else, but the ad, our video, popped up. And then within 24 hours later, some of them were shown a multiple choice item, a single test question, which was asking them to evaluate a claim being made here and identify whether it has emotional language in it. And we got 22,000 responses, and the results are shown here. This is the increase in recognition, in technique recognition, after being shown the video. At the top, we have the emotional language that you've seen. At the bottom, we tried another video. It doesn't really matter. Both of them work. As you can see here, pretty much everything is to the right of 0, meaning that on average, all items combined, people increase their ability to detect emotional language by about 5%. And according to YouTube, that's a huge effect. When they do normal ads for toothpaste or whatever, they're happy with 1 or 2% if they're lucky. We achieved something much bigger than that. And here's a meta-analysis that is forthcoming after revision, hopefully shortly in the near future, where we looked across 33 different studies whether discernment between good and bad information, let's call it that for simplicity, whether that increases after inoculation. And what you can see here in both panels, the two different panels are for two different types of methodology. The yellow line or region is above the purple, and that means there is an increase in discernment, an increase in the ability to tell good from bad information. These are so-called ROC curves. Not all of you will be familiar with them, but those of you who are will say, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. There's a big effect because you're moving the curve up regardless of the confidence of the person involved. That's why we have these different dots. They refer to different criteria, different levels of confidence. It doesn't matter where you are on the confidence scale, you increase discernment. So that's good news. And Google has put that into practice by doing a field test of inoculation in Germany. And they looked at these 3 different manipulative techniques ahead of the European election, I think it was, in Germany. So this was done a couple of years ago. And instead of our emotion and false dichotomies, they used these 3 different manipulative techniques. They reached more than half of all users on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram in Germany. So 42 million views of those videos. They were not ours, but they were inspired by our videos. And what they found was substantial improvement of the people in being able to detect when they're exposed to those different manipulative techniques, such as fear-mongering, whataboutism, decontextualization. The details of the techniques are less important than the fact that something, happened here. We can move the needle through inoculation. So that inoculation process is foundational to a lot of other things we look at in Program Info, as well as probably in some of the student projects this year. And Right now, we're drawing another project with Jigsaw to a close that was slightly different. I don't have time to explain it all, but basically, we have developed a machine learning classifier that ultimately can predict real world violence from text analysis. So we can now look at text and predict whether the person writing it is likely to go out and commit a horrible, violent crime. So that's kind of nice. Well, the violence isn't, but being able to predict can be useful. And so that's the latest that we have achieved. And okay, any questions, by the way? Just raise your hand or yell out. I'm happy to take questions. And if not, then let me move on to the next project, funded by the Volkswagen Foundation, which, by the way, has nothing to do with Volkswagen, except 80 years ago it was created by Volkswagen. This is, again, a large team of people from all around the world. Some of them are here. Fabio is here. And that project is about rebalancing human and algorithmic decision making online. So, what we're concerned with is algorithmic content curation. Now, everybody by now, I guess, knows this, that if you go online, you look at Facebook or Twitter or any other kind of social media, certainly TikTok, for example, what you see is determined by algorithms. And the algorithms are programmed to satisfy your presumed preferences, which is nice, I guess, unless, of course, your preferences have been shaped to include extremist content, and then it becomes a bit more troubling for democracy. Now, we know from research that the way in which you consume information online and how it is being ranked by the news feed can influence your preferences and perceptions. So this is a fairly important thing that is going on online, and it is not fully understood, and it is not at all under public or democratic control. It is under the control of the platforms. And for example, about 70% of all time on YouTube is the result of AI, not what people came to see. People come to see one video and they stick around because, ooh, this is all so interesting, and they get sucked into a long time on the platform through an algorithm that is unknown and not under public control. Now, before you think that I'm, that I dislike algorithms, no, I don't dislike them. They're essential. You can't make use of the internet unless you had an algorithm. Every time you type a search term into Google, you're interacting with an algorithm. That's indispensable. If you couldn't do that, you'd never find anything. And it makes a lot of sense. If there's a person who doesn't like violent movies, why would Netflix present her with, the Chainsaw Massacre? And if Bob likes to share current events, why shouldn't Facebook provide him with exciting stories? But the problem emerges when the algorithm is making suggestions without regard to quality, which, by the way, we know happens. And, excuse me, if the information you're presenting is exploiting your personal vulnerabilities. Now, one of the things that we know is that if I have access to your likes on Facebook, I can infer your personality. If I have access to 300 of your likes, anything you've liked on Facebook, then I can write a machine learning model that predicts your personality better than your spouse. And with only 10 likes, I do as well or just a bit better than work colleagues in knowing what your personality is. And once I know what your personality is, I can potentially exploit vulnerabilities in that personality and present you with information to manipulate that vulnerability. And this gets us into something called micro-targeting, which is the idea that advertisers can choose their audiences on Facebook, knowing what their personality is, and then they might be able to manipulate you through that. Now, how would an advertiser know that? Well, all they need is, they read the literature and look at what likes correspond to what personalities, and then you present ads to audiences that like whatever it is you've identified, motorcycles, lipsticks, whatever it is, you can target those audiences. And you then have statistical information, not certainty, but you have statistical information about the person's personality. And if you do this in the political domain, then all of a sudden you've converted a free marketplace of ideas to a sphere of manipulation. That has been shown repeatedly to be effective. And the question that we examined in our project is, well, how do you respond to that? Well, one thing is to detect it, that you're being micro-targeted, and then you try to reverse engineer that and somehow warn people that they're being manipulated, which is exactly what we did. This is one fairly recent publication by our team, and the title tells it all. We developed a way in which we can infer a person's personality through a machine learning model by what they like to read. Now, you can take that information and say, aha, if they want to read this, then clearly I can write an ad to be consonant with with their preferences or not. Okay? And so what we did to test that idea is to look at a personality dimension called openness. We looked at actual Facebook ads from 2022 or 21 or whatever it was. And here are two examples. The one that was scored lowest on openness by our machine learning algorithm is the one on the left. The one that is highest on openness is the one on the right. And if you look at these two ads, then yeah, you can sort of, even if you don't know much about openness, you can sort of feel how the one on the left is kind of, whoa, stay home, protect yourself against experience, whereas the one on the right, stunning, digital exhibition, concept of well-being data, power, potential, that's all very outgoing, very kind of open to experience. Now, what we then did was to run several experiments. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of experiments where we measured two things. We measured the degree to which an ad was judged to be open in personality dimension by our machine learning algorithm. In other words, we measured how likely this was to appeal to people of a certain level of openness. And we also measured the person's actual openness through a questionnaire. And of course, they consented for that to happen in the experiment. And then we look at what people make of an ad as a function of the discrepancy. That's the red arrows here, between the person's actual openness and the text in the ad. And we did this over and over again. In one case with actual political Facebook ads. I just showed you two of them a few slides ago. And the next time round with synthetic messages that were rewritten by ChatGPT, by AI, to be either high or low in openness. So to illustrate what I mean by that, here's a text, the original text, which was taken from a real Facebook ad. We then asked AI, okay, rewrite this in high openness. And this is what it does. Okay. experience the extraordinary, join the global movement for, vaccines. You can really see the sort of idea here to appeal to people who love new experiences. And this one is low in openness. Protect yourself and your family. Stay safe. Traditional approach. These are all things that are not challenging people's experiences, but is getting the message across in a different way. In both cases, the message is go and get vaccinated, but it is written in two different ways for people with different personalities. And the question now is, if I match the person to the type of ad, is it more effective? And the answer is yes. Now, what I'm showing you here, this is one study, but it was basically the same across all three. What I'm showing you here is the persuasiveness of an ad judged by our participants as a function of the discrepancy between their own personality and that of the ad, meaning the extent to which the ad appeals to either openness or low openness individuals. Now, the effect here doesn't look huge, but statistically it's highly significant. The greater that number along the x-axis, the greater the mismatch between a person and the ad, the lower the persuasiveness. And that is micro-targeting, what you're seeing here. If you target people so that the match is minimal, so on the left-hand side, they're more persuaded than if you're showing people something that is mismatching their personality. And we can infer all that based on a machine learning model that we designed based on people's preferences for reading material. So that gives you a fairly powerful tool to manipulate people if you're so inclined. Of course, we just did the research. We're not manipulating people, but we now have the knowledge to do so. And also, coincidentally, we've confirmed that you can use AI to tailor ads to people's personality. It's very easy. All you need to do is start out with a text. Then you tell AI to go high or low in openness in our case, and bang, it'll go and do that, and it'll be successful. Now, if you find that that's a little too manipulative, and I certainly do, what can you do about it? Well, it's tough because it's very difficult to know when an advertiser is engaging in this, because if they don't admit to it, how would you ever know? Well, our answer was to try and flip this whole thing around by looking at the match between personality in the ad and the personality of a user. And when it is, quote unquote, too good to be true, then we can alert them and maybe say, hello, you might be manipulated, because you know what? That message you're seeing here, that is so persuasive for you. I wonder if that happened by chance. And that fits well within the current European legislation, the EU AI Act, that is emphasizing transparency, that people should know when they're interacting with AI, and then it's presumed that then enables people to dismiss the AI or whatever they want to do with it, but at least they're informed about what is happening. So the question is, can we defang the micro-targeting I just told you about? And we call this a pop-up intervention, where we again used Facebook ads. We again asked people to tell us how persuasive things are. But now, in addition to matching or not matching the personality of our participants, some of the ads that were in fact targeted to a person were attached with a pop-up. What do we mean by a pop-up? This is a pop-up. Warning, this advertisement may be appealing to you because it might be tailored. If that happens, it might be micro-targeting. Micro-targeting, blah, blah, we explain all that. And we pop up this warning. And the question now is If we tell people that they're being targeted on the basis of their personality, is that sufficient to eliminate the advantage of micro-targeting in persuading people? And the answer is no, basically, to a first approximation. I'm showing you 3 studies here. It's a complicated graph, but I can simplify it by saying just focus on the top. Now look at the green dots and confidence intervals with that. That's the effect of targeting. And in all 3 studies, that's to the left of the 0 line, that's the vertical solid line, meaning that if an ad is not targeted at you, it's less persuasive. Or put it another way, if it is targeted at you, it's more persuasive. Doesn't matter which way you express it, same effect. And this tells us that yet again, as I've already shown you, in 3 different studies, we replicate the targeting advantage, or in this case, the non-targeting disadvantage. All right, but now look at the top, the red. That's about the effect of the pop-up. Does the pop-up make a difference? Whether or not a targeted ad comes with a warning? And the answer is no, it doesn't. In the first 2 studies, it overlaps 0. The confidence intervals overlap 0. In the last study, it sits outside the 0, but it is within the blue band, which is the region of equivalence. So that's saying, well, never mind statistical significance, does it actually make a measurable difference? And the answer is no, because the red dot sits within this region within which we consider effects to be negligible or uninteresting. And so, bottom line here is that warning people that they might be manipulated does not eliminate the advantage of manipulating people. So, transparency, at least in this case, is not enough. And this isn't the only time we've shown that. Simon, who's here, Simon Clark, he's doing his PhD on this in the context of deepfakes. And what we've shown there is a similar phenomenon where even if you tell people, hey, you're watching something that's deepfaked, they're still influenced by the information, even if they accept that it's all fake. And that's, again, concerning, I guess, because if it's completely fake, you should just ignore it. People don't. Transparency does not appear to be enough. Okay, moving on to ProDemInfo. This is the project that is not about to expire. This is going to be with us for another 2 years. Again, a team from all around the place. I haven't updated Fabio's affiliation, but he's still around and present, even from Brazil. And ProDemInfo addresses this basic conundrum that, and I'm illustrating this with Donald Trump, but the idea is the same no matter where you look, that some people can be incredibly inaccurate. They might be lying to the public every day, and yet their followers think they're honest. So how can a serial liar be considered to be honest? That's the basic conundrum of that ProDemInfo is trying to examine. And how do we do that? Well, we do that, or did it initially, through some theoretical work by analyzing what it means for somebody to be honest, or what it means for somebody to be true, something to be true. How do we, like what process do we appreciate, or what process do we engage to determine honesty or truth? And what we came up with, what this analysis came up with, is 2 endpoints of a continuum. And here in this case, We call one belief speaking, the other one fact speaking, to indicate that when we rely on people's subjective beliefs and their sincerity and authenticity, then we consider honesty from a belief speaking perspective. And if we want people to be accurate and evidence based, then we're evaluating them or are engaging in rhetoric from what we call the fact speaking perspective. Now, here are some examples of belief speaking or language that is expressing an idea of truth and honesty that is not based on accuracy. If somebody says truth isn't truth, meaning I can say whatever I want because it's my personal truth and whatever, it doesn't matter what you think. My personal truth is that the earth is flat. That's what is implied by saying, or what Giuliani here wanted to imply by saying truth isn't truth. And here, some other personalities, British personalities saying, fact is an antiquated expression. Now, there is no such thing as a fact anymore. Or one man's fact is another man's lie. Well, that makes it very easy because, if there's no ground truth, no independent way to assess a fact, well, then you can say anything you want. And there's no accountability. How can you hold somebody accountable if they say, yeah, well, that's just my fact? You go away. Don't tell me I was wrong because, it was my fact. So this is a very problematic development, and I think is, as I'm showing here, as I'm saying here, is very challenging and damaging to democracy because you can't have a democracy without accountability and without having some shared body of knowledge. And the moment you do away with that, you got a serious problem. So to demonstrate this, we've done a number of different studies. Let me show you one study here where we looked at the tweets of all members of the US Congress for that 12-year period. That turns out to be about 1.6 million tweets. It's quite a large volume of tweets. And for each text, we identify whether it is fact speaking or belief speaking. Now, I've already sort of explained fact speaking and belief speaking, but let me try and clarify it a bit more. Fact speaking and belief speaking is characterizing language. It is the rhetoric people employ. And we have a machine learning model, as usual, a computational approach to language that tells us for any given text whether the person who wrote it is likely to think of honesty and truth as relying on facts or as relying on beliefs and sincerity. So we can put numbers to tweets and say, well, this is all about belief. This is all about facts. And we can also do this for the news articles that are being shared in a tweet. And we can then correlate the language, the rhetoric, to the accuracy by considering the quality of the news that is being shared. We use something called NewsGuard, which is a commercial product that is designed and maintained by expert journalists who are looking at domains, at websites, and determine the quality of the websites based on, whether or not they correct errors, whether or not they differentiate between opinion and fact reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So they have good criteria for establishing quality. And let me illustrate this with an example. These are actual tweets. And the Republican on the left, Democrat on the right. These are some members of Congress in the US at some point. And according to our model, they're identified as belief speaking on top and fact speaking at the bottom. So look at the top left. Schiff definitely doesn't have an ironclad impeachment case, as he's desperately trying to suggest. He surely has an ironclad imagination, though, and a boatload of bad intentions. All right, now that is not really relying on a lot of evidence, is it? That is more about belief, about making claims. Compare that to the bottom tweet. We need to know how this pandemic started to stop it from ever happening again. I encourage whistleblowers who can inform a complete scientific and objective investigation into the origins of COVID-19 to get in touch with me. Well, that's, maybe a weird thing to say, but it's still talking about facts and evidence and science and all that good stuff. And for Democrats, you have the example on the right. And so we can identify speech based on our model, whether it's more about belief than facts or vice versa. And now the question is, okay, how does the speech in a tweet relate to the quality of the information? And here it is. That's part of the main result. On the right, we have fact speaking. On the left, belief speaking. Now, in each graph, the red lines are Republicans, the blue lines are Democrats. Remember, these are members of Congress, so they have one or the other party. What you see on the right for both parties is that the more the text involved fact speaking, the higher the quality of the information being shared in that tweet. So the link goes to a higher quality information if it is surrounded by language that considers facts and evidence to be relevant to truth and honesty. Now look at the left. Get the exact opposite, and it's accentuated for Republicans. The more belief speaking is being expressed in the tweet, the lower the quality of the information being shared. In other words, belief speaking, this appeal to intuition and belief and sincerity without considering evidence, that language is a gateway to sharing misinformation. And we think that that is a key ingredient of this conundrum, how Donald Trump can be considered honest by Republicans. And that is because they think of honesty as being a matter of sincere expression of a belief, and they don't care about the actual world and how that relates. They just want their politicians to honestly express their beliefs, even if they're false. And that, I think, is important to understand what is going on. So we have a bunch of projects going on this. So controlling the perspective on honesty. That is, we've now started a series of experiments. Fabio has done it, and Kia, who's not here today, has done it, where we tell participants which perspective to adapt, and they can do that. They're really good at it. And once they've done that, we observe the flow-on consequences and see whether or not the politician is considered honest, depending on how people view honesty itself. And that has been very promising, and we'll learn more about that later in the semester. Yeah, Theo, you got a question there.
Yeah, just about, really excellent presentation, just about the belief speaking and fact speaking. Do you have, or have you analyzed the data in terms of the penetration of those respective categories?
By penetration, you mean how far it spreads online, for example?
Precisely that, yes.
Very good question. I think the answer is no. I don't think we've done that. Very good question. Yeah, we could look at the virality of something as a function of that. Haven't done that, I don't think. That's a good question. I should cue it to the list of incredibly important things to do.
Thank you.
I don't think we've done that. No, but it's a good point. Very good point. Okay, let me move on to the last. We have a few minutes left. The last project called JitsuVax, which in fact finishes today. Today is the last day ever of JitsuVax, the end of an era. It's been going on for 4.5 years. Um, it is about vaccination, as the name implies. It is about inoculation against misinformation. And I've explained inoculation at the outset. And it is about how to talk to patients who are vaccine hesitant. How can you have a constructive conversation with somebody who's vaccine hesitant? And very often, people who are vaccine hesitant are pretty strongly committed to that opinion. And to make a very long story short, we have developed something called the empathetic refutational interview, or ERI for short, which consists of 4 steps. And the 4 steps are as follows. Each of these steps was examined by experiments and is based on psychological theory and evidence. And what we do is that we first talk to a person and ask them, hey, why are you concerned about vaccinations? Now, that allows us to understand what we call attitude roots, which are the deep underlying fundamentals of a person's personality, for example, their identity, that drives their overt beliefs. And we then affirm the person, not their mistaken beliefs, but the person. We say, hey, yes, I understand where you're coming from. You're concerned about the safety of a drug and the side effects. So we affirm the person. Now, in so doing, we create a space for conversation because we're not being confrontational. And within that space, we then pivot to correcting the misconception. And we say, oh, but by the way, actually, you're right to be concerned, but we have looked at the side effects of vaccines. And so far, they have been minimal or whatever. We give them the true information, of course. And we follow that up with more facts. So there is a sequence of 4 things involved. Doesn't take terribly long. But what it does do is to create a productive space for conversation. Then we train healthcare professionals to administer this new technique. They do find it challenging to learn at first, but once they get it, they're very positive about it. And we did this in Romania a couple of years ago. We took a control group of GPs whom we didn't train, another one who got a 1-day training in the ERI. It takes a full day to get to be conversant in doing this. They then each went back to their surgeries and consulted with patients. And we observed more than 100 consultations in each case. And we looked at people's attitudes and the appointment records. And what we find is this. The ERI shifts attitudes towards vaccinations after a visit to the doctor. And moreover, and more importantly, it increases appointments to get vaccinated by about half, from 50% of all patients to 78%. So there's a huge increase in people saying, yeah, okay, book me in for next Wednesday and I'll get vaccinated. And so that is in a nutshell the product of that project. There's a lot more to it. We've actually set up a spin-out company that is now offering training within the NHS and other health authorities in the United Kingdom. And that is hopefully, well, it's continuing beyond today being the last day of JitsuVax. And so the plan here is to have a legacy of the research and to change practice in the reality of the NHS in the UK for doctors to have more productive conversations about vaccines. And finally, just very quickly, the SOMI for Dem project, Social Media for Democracy is what the acronym stands for. That's ongoing till April, so we have another 6 months of that. And what we're doing here is to go back to this whole issue of manipulation through news feeds and algorithms and things. And what we want to do is we want to add a signal of information quality to the newsfeed rankings in addition to inferring the user preferences. Right now, all you see on Facebook is supposed to keep you engaged on the platform. They don't care about quality of the information. What we want to do is we want to add cues that enhance the quality of the information without having to analyze the content. And that is really challenging and tricky, but also very rewarding. Because the idea here is to sidestep allegations or actual censorship. We never consider what's in the message. We consider the context alone to infer quality. And the amazing thing is that is actually doable, but it's a very complicated thing to explain. So I'll skip it for now. And we have 3 minutes for questions. And thank you for your attention. Any questions? Raise your hand. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see what is happening. And I may also stop recording so you can